Alrighty, I think we're good to go. We have a good critical mass here. Welcome everyone to this webinar hosted by Robust Intelligence. We're here to discuss global AI policy, providing a snapshot of today's landscape and best practices in operationalizing international standards and regulations. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping items. This webinar will be recorded and available for viewing afterward on demand. During the webinar, attendee mics will be muted. If you have any questions, please just drop them in the Q&A box below. It'll be accessible at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try our best to get to them towards the end of the webinar. Alrighty, I'm excited to be moderating this webinar with our three panelists deeply involved in AI policy and standards globally. Many people at Robust Intelligence have been deep in AI research for over a decade, and we contribute regularly to the development of industry standards like at NIST, MITRE, and OWASP. And we've developed an AI security platform that helps companies put policy into practice. So it's really exciting to chat to three people who are deeply involved in the space and helping shape it. I think we should all start with hearing introductions from our panelists. Yolanda, I'd love to start with you. Just a quick overview of what organization you represent, what you do there, and maybe a little bit on your background to what got you there.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yolanda Landquist. I'm a Director of Global AI Governance at the Future Society, which is an independent nonprofit based in the US and Europe with the mission to align AI through better governance. We specialize in AI policy and governance. We're working in the US, EU, and at global levels. I'm based in San Francisco. My background is in public policy from Harvard Kennedy School. And I'm also an appointed expert at OECD, the World Bank, The Economist, and a few more. So trying to bring the civil society perspective, which is more and more pro-regulatory. Thanks.
Awesome. And right over to you, Dan, kind of the same set of questions.
All right. Well, thank you, Ali, for bringing us together. Hi, everybody. I am Dan Nikita. I work in the European Parliament for Dragos Tudorache. Is head of cabinet and policy advisor on AI, and Dragos is one of the two rapporteurs, meaning negotiators of the European Parliament for the Artificial Intelligence Act, which is the brand new European-wide law governing artificial intelligence, and we'll get to talk about that later. By way of background, I lived actually half of my life in the US, so New York and DC, went to school there and worked mostly in think tanks and more in the international relations security area, and then went to Romania, where I'm from, met Dragos, joined the government, and then joined him here in Brussels. So that's a short bio, quite comprehensive bio, and a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Happy to have you here. And John, last but not least, we'd love to hear from you.
No, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm John Calhoun. I work at Microsoft. I'm a program manager in our corporate standards group. And in the context of this webinar, I participate in the U.S. organization that represents our interest at the international standards level, particularly, and I'll give you the alphabet soup. It's ISO, IEC, JTC1, SC42 for artificial intelligence standardization.
Awesome. It's so great to have the three of you representing such different sides of the spectrum of the AI policy space. To start off the questions, I'd love to jump straight to Dan, which I'm sure he was expecting this due to all the EU AI Act news recently. So the text for the act was recently leaked, and I'm sure Dan has been extremely busy over the past few months. So I'd love to just kind of get the quick explanation from you on the AI Act, what it's attempting to address, how it's going to affect EU companies and simultaneously affect US and international companies. Your overview, I'm sure you've given this spiel a few times now.
Well, stop me if it gets too long. In brief, I think that the EU AI Act is a legislation that is aiming to increase trust in the technology, and therefore, in terms of economic effects, increase the adoption of artificial intelligence. by focusing on the areas where artificial intelligence systems can pose risks to health, safety, or fundamental rights, basically a risk-based approach. If your AI system can discriminate, if it can do harm, and we'll get later on into societal-wide harms when we talk about models, then it needs to go through a certain number of steps that make it, I would say, safer to put on the market. It's a typical product safety regulation, but with a lot of impact, especially since AI is such a revolutionary field in a sense. I can get a little bit more technical and say that it only regulates systems that are deemed high risk, and there is a defined list of those systems. Those that are used mostly in positions, for example, of an imbalance of power, so state authorities in relationship to citizens, for example, or police force or immigration or other contexts that can bring significant prejudices to fundamental rights. But on the other hand, we have also worked to adapt the AI Act to bring it up to speed with technological developments. And in the same risk-based approach, it also sets rules for the big, powerful AI models that could have systemic impact or systemic risk. And we can talk about those in later on if you want. I think that it is comprehensive in its scope because it applies across the board. So it's a horizontal regulation. It's not sector specific. It applies in many sectors. As I said, the goal of the regulation is to, from a strategic point of view, is to increase the uptake of AI by making the technology safer. And of course, you make that safer by working to protect health, safety, and fundamental rights. I think that's, for those not familiar with the AI Act, that's a very big, broad overview. Do let me know if you want me to go into the different risk categories. I will add one more thing, and then I'll stop. That is, the core of the act focuses on this risk-based approach, but there are other systems and other uses of AI that are also regulated and on a spectrum, right? So you have some uses of artificial intelligence that we feel are not in accordance with the values, the democratic values of the European Union, and those practices are outright banned, such as, for example, social scoring on a mass scale is done in China. And I, for one, am fairly comfortable with banning things that we don't want to see in our society. Then there are obligations for AI systems that interact directly with an end user. For example, chatbots and images that are manipulated with AI and deep fakes, and those have transparency obligations. So that kind of gives you a pyramid of risk, right? Forbidden practices, chunk of it is high risk or a risk-based approach. Then you have some systems that require transparency. And then within the risk-based approach, there is language and a set of obligations, distinct obligations for what people might know as foundation models, but we have expanded a little bit the term to make it more technology neutral. And now we are dealing with general purpose AI models.
Excellent overview. Thank you. I'm sure that was very helpful to most of our audience members. I'm going to ask one follow-up question, although I'm sure I could ask many. I'm curious to hear from you kind of the immediate next steps. I know tomorrow there's a big vote happening, and then kind of what those next steps look like for companies. What do companies need to be paying attention to? When will there be kind of requirements for them? And just a little bit more for the kind of people from companies who will be impacted by this perspective.
Definitely. So, and again, stop me if I abuse my time. There are a number of different time frames for which this regulation will apply. So for certain systems, for prohibited uses of AI, we felt that it's appropriate to have that enter into effect as soon as possible. So 6 months after this is signed into law, that those provisions will come, into application. Then you have the fast-moving technology of models, which again needs to enter into application rather soon, because otherwise the rules become updated, and many of these rules are of a flexible enforcement type of rules. That is, we are also establishing a regulator or an enforcer at the European level working with industry, and we feel that that collaboration and that interaction, helping industry on one side be compliant, but also helping the institution understand where the market is going, should come into effect fairly soon. So that's 1 year. And then the bulk of it will come into effect in 2 years. Now, I think in terms of next steps for companies, because this is just a timeline, once the AI Act becomes law, there's a couple of things any company can do to prepare for compliance. And of course, there is an effect, even though it is just for the European market for now, but it will have an effect for everybody who has to do with selling to the European market, putting products on the European market. So that's a lot of the companies. One thing they could do is to get involved in the next steps of the legislative process, the drawing up of different codes of conduct, codes of practice that will guide the implementation. Getting involved in the standard setting bodies, of course, is also important, because the AI Act is basically relying on standards for presumption of conformity, standards that are yet to be developed. For companies already with a significant presence in Europe, who want to get a head start on compliance, the Commission has put out an initiative called the AI Pact, which in simple terms is you sign on to the pact, you get information on how others are working towards compliance, and you get the Commission, the main enforcer in the Union, supporting you getting into a compliance state before you actually have the date of entry into application, which gives you a competitive advantage, right? Because you're working with the Commission and the regulator to get compliant. And in terms of next steps, because I feel it's important, not just for companies, I think in terms of next steps, there's been a lot of work done between the EU and the US on, although coming from different regulatory traditions, with different instruments, but there is a lot of work done on exchanging ideas and getting to some sort of interoperability of the way we approach AI. I would say convergence, but that's too hard of a word, but let's just call it interoperability of policy and of priorities. And I think there is a crucial role for companies, especially those who have a presence both in the US and in the EU, to facilitate and to be that conveyor belt between the two, so that we get to a as harmonized as possible approach in terms of what we are trying to achieve when talking about regulating AI, or that's one way of putting it, but supporting the development and uptake of AI could be another way of putting it.
Awesome. Yeah, the focus on harmonizing globally is, I think, super important to a lot of our customers and companies, because a lot of companies do have a global presence and they're not just isolated to one country. This is a great segue to a couple questions I have for John, because you represent a different type of AI governance, which is this standard setting body. And a lot of what Dan was just alluding to is a crucial element of the success of the AI Act. So in contrast to regulatory compliance like the AI Act, what is the purpose of ISO/IEC standards? And sorry if I mixed some of the letters there. who benefits and can you tell us about how companies can consider this guidance alongside regulation like the AI Act and other regulatory compliance surrounding AI? Would love to hear about that from you, John.
I'll try and make this story short, but there's a question. The Uber question nowadays is what's appropriate for standardization and to some degree when. Things are a bit different in the industry than when I started a few years ago, where in AI, for example, there's less appetite for deep technology standardization. In other words, standardizing particular learners or AI algorithms. There's a lot more appetite for management, governance, sorts of things. So, compared to say our group that does the MPEG standard, it's very deep. 300 PhD mathematicians come together, several times a year and develop something very, very technical that makes it possible to play your videos on billions of devices around the world. There's not an appetite on the AI side for that, but a large appetite for the issues around governance, and also a large appetite to normalize the concepts and the vocabulary. AI has been an area, essentially in research for 60 years, and it kind of exploded into the commercial space less than 10 years ago, and has stair-stepped in its capabilities very, very rapidly, and it's made it challenging for both organizations and I think for governments and NGOs to sort of keep up on what's a concept mean, what's a foundation model mean, and particularly how you hang any requirements off of those terms, and how do you even scope what an artificial intelligence system is. There is quite a lot of discussion around the way that the AI Act came out on that. It seems to have settled down, but I can remember some pretty heated discussions early on about how to scope that particular regulation. And then the OECD, where Yolanda does some work, they got in pretty early on and kind of smoothed the waters a little bit. And in SE42, we relied quite a lot on the OECD definition of AI system to form our own. So that that's a very high level. The governance and management aspects and vocabulary concepts are very high. We do have some deeper technical things that we're attempting to do. But I got to tell you, the goalposts are moving pretty fast, even on talking about some of the hardware aspects. There's new products, and the technology is advancing almost daily. So, what do organizations do, relative to an emerging technology and regulatory landscape with the standards that we've got? There's a few that are quite valuable for organizations just to even normalize internally. We have a very good standard on vocabulary. It's ISO IEC 22989. It was experts from many countries came together, and we spent 2 years discussing that, and we're still ongoing with that because generative AI and LLMs that Dan alluded to kind of came up recently, and that was a spot that we're catching up on. So it's a work in progress as the technology progresses. In terms of governance/management for an organization, we have a management system. We call it the AI management system, and it sits alongside other management systems for security and environment and corporate responsibility and things like that. That provides organizations a risk-based framework for accounting for for the risk relative to their development, use, and deployment of those systems aligns very well with the approach the AI Act is taking in terms of risk management, where you're not setting down these hard borders and saying this is absolutely right and this is absolutely wrong. You're giving people the ability to think through their risks and the mitigations. There are some important requirements in there. One is for an impact assessment, and that's we also have a standard in progress for that. That's an extraordinarily valuable tool for organizations to be honest and planful about identifying the risks and the mitigations and the impact, not only and that's evolved. It used to be impact to the organization, but impact to society is I hate to say equally important. It's always been that way, but commercial organizations tended to look more inward on risk management, and AI is very much forcing everyone to look at the broader picture. And you read some of the news headlines that come out every day for things that happen. Security is a good example. Has impacts much broader than just on the organization. Our lives are digitized, and so all of those risks around digitization really extend across society, and governments and NGOs are working very hard to protect that, and while working with industry so that we can get the benefits of these technologies. So I think that's enough rambling for the moment.
No, it's great to hear. Yeah, we see this in our own customers all the time, that they really rely on ISO standards because there's just, there's a need for guidance, and it's a well-trusted source for that. I think you already started to allude to this a bit, but the importance of harmonization across, regulatory compliance and standards, and you alluded to some of Yolanda's work at the OECD and that type of work, which segues really well into my questions for Yolanda. So Yolanda, who has spent the better part of the last decade entrenched in global AI policy, truly global too, living abroad and in the States and working on national AI strategies around the world. I'd love to hear from you kind of on some of these efforts that John was just speaking about, and just generally kind of what you predict about the AI policy trends for the year, and kind of where you might have some concerns for where there might still be some gaps.
Sure. So we're very excited about the EU AI Act. So thanks a lot, Dan, for you and your team's hard work there. At the global levels, actors like the OECD AI Policy Observatory offer great resources, and I think will hopefully become more and more relevant. For example, they're launching an AI incident monitor for incident tracking and reporting, which can become a relevant governance mechanism. We also see some activity by the UN starting up this year, which should, in the long term, lead to more inclusive actual global governance involving developing countries, China, and others. That is to be determined. Hopefully, things continue to go in that way. That's led by the UN Global Digital Compact. Right now, there's the high-level advisory board body. So we'll see. We're keeping our eyes on those programs, but it seems like the EU AI Act is basically the credible legislation out there, which is great because foundation models don't have credible regulation right now. And we keep on talking about how this is the most powerful technology of our time. But then it's like, regulation sounds crazy to people. I don't know why. Maybe because I'm here in San Francisco and it's just a very tech forward area. This year, though, we are excited by policy opportunities in the United States. So we're turning our attention here for the first time. So there's the executive order on safe and secure and trustworthy AI, which empowers federal agencies to update their mandates them to update their responsibilities for AI, and that's very exciting. Hopefully those stick, and hopefully there is an overturning of them if there's an administration change. But hopefully they will stick, especially some of the ones around critical infrastructure. Look optimistic to maybe even to pave the way into legislation, hopefully the ones around NIST as well. So for example, we're starting to help some of the agencies in their implementation. The NIST AI RMF offers a great example and is being updated for generative AI. And the NIST cybersecurity framework offer great guidance to companies. So if you're not working with those, you should be. I also want to point to FTC and other agencies are starting to be a little bit more proactive, maybe around anti-monopoly, or signaling that companies can't deceive customers or have fraud. And so they're starting to look at how they update their existing mandates for generative AI. Copyright law, we know that liability, I think, will be an important topic in the US AI policy, how to create liability for companies. And I would love that to see more and more for the foundation model developers, even if their technology is used in downstream app developers and smaller startups who face liability via the interface with the market. I would love to see more responsibility and accountability and transparency requirements and testing and third-party audits and just general safety and ethics and security requirements upstream at the foundation model level. That is, for example, OpenAI, Microsoft, Anthropic, Google DeepMind, etc. And let's see, deep fakes might be easy, like it seems like politically low-hanging fruit, common area of concern that politically might lead to some action, bipartisan across different concern areas. Deep fakes are more and more aware. So hopefully my hope is that we won't only do some band-aids on some of these things, but actually have something comprehensive so that we're protected in the long term across safety and fundamental rights. I might close by what I'm concerned about and what I think the AI policy community still has a really big open gap is on open source AI, which brings benefits and risks. Benefits around democratizing technology, but risks around proliferation of this dual use, potentially harmful technology, right? Ahead of an election year, we could have scaling of misinformation campaigns, not just in the US, but globally, most elections, I think, ever. Opening the door to potential biosecurity, cybersecurity, and other harms. So and policymakers don't know what to do with open source AI yet, right? Like the US Department of Commerce, the NTIA has to put out a position, and I'm hoping that there will be clarification that some models are too powerful to open source. And hopefully that will be consistent in the EU and others as well. We just had Zuckerberg, for example, announcing that Meta will be progressing towards more and more powerful AI. They have a ton of compute and they plan to open source it, right? So and they were part of discussions with industry groups where we collectively agreed not to open source frontier AI. So that's where I think regulation is needed.
Totally. Yolanda, you mentioned so many things where I want to follow up. On the open source AI note, it is interesting. We talk about that a lot here at Robust Intelligence because our customers leverage open source models. And, we're all about risk mitigation. So we think about that a lot. And it is a huge gap. We developed something called the AI risk database, which is essentially an open sourced database where you can, anyone in the public can submit a risk that you have detected in an open source model. And that's kind of open source for people to see as like you mentioned that some other database as well. I think there's a couple efforts doing this now to kind of help promote, that type of discussion and awareness. That you've also mentioned something about how being in San Francisco, the regulation topic is funny because it's very pro-tech. That's something I'm based in San Francisco as well. And that is something that we do see a lot of because, it seems to be contradicting innovation, which actually leads me to a question that I have for all three of you being from someone who's developing regulation, someone who's kind of in the middle of it all, and John, even someone who's at Microsoft, but also developing standards. Some people argue that it stifles innovation, and I would love to know how you would respond to that. I'm sure you've all had to respond to this before, but I would love to hear kind of what your take is, especially now that it's something that's coming to fruition more than it ever has before.
I guess I'll go first. Yes, industry always has this concern that regulation and even standards is going to stifle their ability to to do a breakthrough and bring it to market. But I think there's been a little more self-awareness the last few years, and privacy was one of the areas where I think this started. And there was a lot of concern around GDPR when it was in development. But we've all managed to ingest that. It's been a bit of a bumpy ride, but the rules of the road have started to emerge globally. The U.S. is a long ways behind Europe, but we're getting a better picture of the environment that we can operate in, and probably a lot more signals than we can gather ourselves on what's acceptable, even to our customers. So I think that extends into the AI space, where we have a better idea of what the rules of the road are, and we can operate within those, and we can work with governments and NGOs to more thoughtfully expand the capabilities and address the risks and potential harms ahead of time. The tech industry in particular, and in San Francisco, you probably experience this every day, where we've had this thing of fail forward fast, and there's that creates a tremendous amount of risk when you're putting out products that are in public facing and in use by billions of people, or affecting billions of people. And so having some rules of the road, but where we can have useful discussions and negotiation on the paths forward is really pretty valuable for industry, I think, nowadays.
I can volunteer next, and give you, because of course to us that was the main question. How do you balance innovation in Europe with everything that is seen as regulation somehow contradicting the idea of innovation. Now, I'll answer. We'll give you the Europe perspective, but I think it applies everywhere. So here we have two main, I would say, components of the European thinking on artificial intelligence. First, you have the idea of trust, right? The ecosystem of trust, where there is a very clearly defined logic. You build trustworthy AI, then you get more adoption, and therefore, if you think in terms of market size, the size of the pie gets bigger, and therefore you have, by that effect alone, more innovation. But then on the other hand, we have a set of policies, macroeconomic policies, that deal specifically with supporting the ecosystem and stimulating innovation and stimulating startups and so on in artificial intelligence. But these are not contradictory, they go hand in hand. So in the ecosystem of excellence, for example, if you want to just conceptually put it in two buckets, we have, for example, opened up the very powerful European supercomputers to startups and SMEs. This just recently, and that's a very big initiative for supporting innovation. But I would go to the core. I want to challenge it within the trust part, where you deal just with regulation, not with the other part. I would challenge that pitting them one against another from just this area. Look, some things we know we don't want in our society, and we've been fighting for them with them for millennia, right? Discrimination, and all of the trespassing of fundamental rights, um, all over the world. We're doing it in the most advanced societies as well. Now, when we build machines, we assume that they will do better than us at some tasks, right? Because that's why we build them. Do we want them to continue to carry with them all of our biases and everything that we've done wrong so far? Or can we, stimulate innovation and startups and a healthy ecosystem that is more human-centric, right? So probably innovation in exploiting people's attention, for example, to get more revenue in your company will go down, but there will be innovation to offer new things, in a more human-centric way. And I have to say, one of the things that I personally look back at with regret, but I wasn't doing what I do now, is that social media was such a beautiful thing when it showed up. It was amazing. I was there. I was among the first users of social media, and it was so good. You connected with people. It helped the human connection. It really was something very beneficial. We wanted innovation. Can anybody argue now that social media is not broken in a sense? And I'm a liberal, I'm a liberal, by training. Liberal economists believe in the market, but there's something wrong about how the attention span of people is being monetized. That's the only thing that matters, no matter what the content, no matter what is in there. Is it helping our societies? I don't know. So those are more philosophical. I'll get to the practical ones too, because of course they have an ideological component. But on a technical level, in the AI Act, we have inserted measures for supporting innovation at the same time that we have worked to prevent some of the more obvious risks to fundamental rights. So we have built a network of regulatory sandboxes in every member state in the European Union, where startups, SMEs, and even larger companies can go in and test their product and improve it, helped by and with, side by side with the regulators, so they can actually be in compliance even if they're building risky or high risk AI systems. We have throughout thought of the impact of different measures on startups and SMEs, and where possible, we have tried to make compliance in terms of everything that you have, when you have bureaucracy or documentation and so on. We have tried to simplify it so that if you're a startup, you get a simplified procedure to comply. And again, we're talking about those AI companies who are building high-risk AI systems, nothing else. So the AI Act doesn't touch on an AI system, for example, in agriculture or analyzing the soil or dripping water to a tomato. It's got absolutely no impact on that type of AI system. It's only those who help in making decisions that could impact fundamental rights of people. And even so, we have throughout the text, so it's a big text, but we have made sure that we take into account, startups and SMEs and the innovation ecosystem as well. But going back, this is only one side of the story, which is addressed by regulation, increasing trust and ultimately adoption of AI. There is another big chunk of the story where we put money in artificial intelligence and we stimulate. We use macroeconomic policy, not a regulatory instrument for that.
I would think, feel free to jump in on this, Dan, as well, that it helps startups and SMEs and smaller downstream app developers to have more requirements for the foundation models, the very large and few, as you mentioned, like very large and few with high systemic risk companies. If they have more requirements, these are largely American companies for now, that helps to provide the transparency and trust for the downstream app developers who don't have that transparency right now about OpenAI's products, for example, that they're using in their consumer-facing products, and they have to be liable and responsible for the impact of consumers without necessarily knowing what's going on upstream unless it's being regulated to be more transparent. So I would think that would help smaller. And the other thing I wanted to point out, so completely agree with you, basically, and completely support your work. With nuclear energy, we missed out as a society from the benefits, the environmental and the efficiency benefits. And we missed out on it because of public concern and outcry after a couple of catastrophic or locally very harmful events. So we can point to that as an example and say, let's get the requirements, the standards, the regulations ex ante for the products to make sure that to prevent a couple of accidents that sway the public away from it, and to make sure that we keep the door open for that beneficial technology. That's an argument I often use. I also often use that, like, basically all the sectors have requirements and registration and standards and regulations. So I don't know why it's so avoided for the most powerful technology that we keep talking about of our time. Thanks.
That's a really interesting analogy to nuclear energy. I've never thought about it like that before, but now I'm going to. So in talking about regulation and this your excellent responses, we did start to talk about requirements for companies. So Yolanda, you mentioned the NIST risk management framework. John, your work on the AI management system, and then of course the AI Act. These things are all kind of from someone at a company, from a perspective of someone trying to make a company compliant and in line with standards. It is quite a complex landscape in that there are quite a few things to be paying attention to. These international ones are, of course, easy for all companies to pay attention to, but then there's also local national government requirements and standards like the Singapore Model AI Governance Framework, NIST, EU, which will likely have more international impact, but it is, an EU AI Act. I'm curious to hear from the three of you, and John, even your experience implementing these things at Microsoft. How should companies think about navigating the complex landscape and kind of making these things all work together?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, and I'm glad that Dan and Yolanda talked about the small medium enterprise issues around this, because it is complex. I mean, again, using a framework and like our AI management system and the AI risk management framework, those are very powerful tools for organizations to organize themselves and their thinking and sort of get that top to bottom buy-in, accountability. One of the things you'll see in a management system in particular is that it starts with policy. And it's not policy for AI in a vacuum. It extends to, gee, what is the companies or the organizations policies around environmental responsibility and people responsibility and all the other things that are necessary for a responsible organization to operate. And I would mention too that there's a lot of synergy between the international standard, the AI management system, and the AI RMF. In fact, NIST has published what they call a crosswalk between the two, so that you can actually use the international components of the international standard to attest to the RMF. There's actually certification standards coming along for the international standard, and see for the AI RMF. But there is synergy. It's good that the risk management or the risk-based approach is taking hold. That's, I think, is what's going to give us the sort of the magic combination of innovation, responsibility, protection, those sorts of things where we're not hard coding things into what we see today. In the U.S. we got locked in on television very badly, and badly is the wrong word, but we started years ago. Huge investments were made in the technology. Regulations came around that were very implementation specific, and it took the U.S. a long time to break out of that. Europe broke out much faster on digital television. So I think I hope we learned our lesson from that, where we can stay away from the implementations, very detailed regulations, and use the risk-based approach where we apply the regulations where they have the most and the best impact for society while still gaining the benefits.
Awesome. Thank you, John. Yolanda or Dan, if you have comments on that too, would love to hear.
Going to be quick so we can get to more topics. But I think that, if I were to talk to a startup, I would say in the past, there was this, in the startup circles, there was the saying, go global from day one. So think, in day one, think about your company, how it would look like it would, going global. I would say that now, especially with artificial intelligence, I would say go compliant from day one, because then you will build a better system, you will build a better model, you will build a better company. And because technology is moving so fast, I know this is not necessarily good news, there's a good side and a bad side. On one hand, the AI Act is fairly stable, and it's going to be the law of the land, at least in Europe, and with the Brussels effect, it's going to influence a lot of other places. But as as technology moves very fast, and as risks increase, if they do, maybe they won't, and novel risks emerge, there will be more regulation, because the role of the regulator is to protect society from those risks. So, responsible growth in AI and responsible management of even unforeseen risk for, bigger companies who are already building cutting edge AI and the bigger models of tomorrow, that is key, because otherwise there's going to be, of course, a clash with the regulators as well. But for smaller companies, compliance from day one is probably the key in building, a successful AI company.
And Dan, you mentioned the Brussels effect, which is perfect because we just got a question in the chat about whether or not there can be parallels drawn to GDPR. And I'm curious if you have some thoughts on that, because GDPR is obviously very global now.
I can give you our perspective, but I want to hear from Yolanda and John as well, because but I think we'll converge on this. I think that the GDPR was a little bit simpler to influence the world regulatory landscape because it is more concrete. It's a big legislation, but we know exactly what personal data is there. It's rather, simple when compared to artificial intelligence. So I think that there is a lot of work to be done in terms of working together across the Atlantic and in international organization, international fora, in the OECD, in the G7, in other fora, to get to more common understanding, like John was saying, common taxonomy and common terminology, so that the effect, the Brussels effect, that's a little bit Brussels centric, but that the values that we feel we have embedded into the regulation get more traction, and those are literally protection of fundamental rights, and the way our societies are based on these fundamental rights. So I think that there will be a Brussels type effect, but it will have to be built over time by a convergence of values, and it will be something that is not going to just happen. It's going to be a proactive engagement effort between all these actors. And I'm happy to see that there was a lot of conversation. I know I was in many of them with the United States, and I'm happy to see even in the executive order and in the EU AI Act, right? You never can attribute causality, but there are some synergies and some elements that are alike. And those conversations helped a lot to get to that. You can point, this conversation led to this article and this, but they look alike in some aspects, and I think that's encouraging.
And often, for example, even in the G7 Code of Conduct, which was a negotiation from the US side, EU, Japan, and several others, you see common references to global alignment and harmonization. And I think that that'll be important as well on things like benchmarking and getting to the technical side. To my point earlier, what level of AI, somewhere between current and, I don't know, like potential AGI, or even, we don't call it that, something even more powerful, multimodal, what level should we not open source it? Should not just everybody in the world have access to those unsecured model weights, right? Like that kind of quantitative harmonization will be really important too. And I hope that we all continue to work towards that and build each other up to higher and higher policy and standards, because what we see, that's necessary to counteract what we see right now in the private sector, which is basically kind of like especially what we thought with the launch of ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and Claude 2 and Sydney Big, one right after another, a race to the bottom to put out products very quickly that were not ready, that were tested and were shown to be problematic and to violate even companies' internal ethical AI principles, but they put them out quickly because they had to, because if they didn't, their competitors would. And that's where you need third parties with strong authority to come in and level the playing field for everybody to say, okay, let's all slow down together. These are requirements, and it's going to be better for everybody. We can afford to wait a couple months and have this be safe and not have some problems that prevent us to get all the benefits of the technology. I don't see how, and I think that, if we continue, investment is continuing to go into AI, large amounts of investment, financial investment in this area where I live. And according to what we're seeing in terms of scaling, that means more and more powerful AI. But AI, the AI we're talking about now, right? Deep learning, large language models is probability based, not 100% robust to all environments. So there will be failures. Cybersecurity is always on the back foot, nowhere close to being improved, right? Cybersecurity talent is a consistent shortage. So we will have failures and we need to be ready. So to add to this societally on the preparedness side, but yeah, this is to echo the compliance up front, start looking at those standards and guidance, regulatory or not up front, so that we can have this actually usher in benefits for society. I mean, most Americans and Europeans, according to polls, think AI will do more harm than good, right? And so it's like we live in this bubble alley where it's just a very tech-forward Bay Area, but we need to be serving people and also stimulating using AI to solve real problems, sustainable development goals, challenges in inclusion for the disabled, for example, not just whatever app will sell.
Yeah, totally. And this kind of, so we're running out of time a little bit, but I'm sure we could keep chatting for a long time. There's one more question in the chat, which kind of leads me to my final, your 1 minute, final advice for attendees. The question is about tools available for automating a lot of these requirements for risk management, whether or not there are tools. That is similar to what kind of our product provides, but I'd love to hear from the three of you about, final advice about how to actionably implement these requirements. It could be a quick kind of closing note. I'm sure the three of you have all kind of started to talk about this in your other responses, but what would your final 1 minute advice be?
Well, I guess I'll go first. I think Dan's advice was really great in terms of you have a pretty good idea what the emerging rules of the road are. So, it's not get ready, it's be ready. And it will take work. I mean, right now, actually, the tools I'm more familiar with are around the data side, as opposed to the governance side. But I've seen, some evidence of startups, taking note of the AI Act and what's coming down with the executive order, and seeing an opportunity to build businesses around tools for that. So I think that will certainly come out as now that we have more clarity on what needs to be automated, and we have the things like the AI RMF and the AI management system that they can build tools around. So emerging, but it's yes, it's not get ready, it's be ready.
Go ahead, Yolanda.
Yeah. Appointing and empowering with authority and resources internal responsible AI teams, not just having them be something on the side, would be important. And then another piece of advice is that sometimes companies have trouble making trade-offs. Sometimes you have trade-offs to make when you're implementing ethical AI frameworks, privacy, security, fairness, etc. And you can start by determining what your internal principles are as a company to help make those trade-offs.
Fully support both Yolanda and John, and I would add standards are crucial. There's going to be so many things that will depend on standards, and that's where you can get, as a company, if you have the resources, and if not, think really deeply about allocating those resources to get involved in the standardization process. First, because you can influence it to a certain extent, but two, because if you have the experts who are participating, then you understand it better and you can adopt it a little bit better. Then, going a little bit bigger, I would say, definitely look at the AI Act. It is a European regulation, the strongest form of law that we make at the European level, meaning that will apply automatically to all 27 member states. To one or another, extent, it will influence the way regulation on AI looks, and it will influence standards as well, and so on. And then going even broader, I think that, as you said, Ali, a lot of the companies have a presence in the US and the EU. I think it's in all of our interest to work to strengthen that relationship across the Atlantic, at the technical, business, economic, political levels, because that is, it's critical for both sides, and in particular on AI. I'm sure that there are many forums in which companies can carry, understanding from one side to the other, and to promote that transatlantic link even more. So. And I want to take a second to thank Ali for inviting us here.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks to you three for taking the time today. We're out of time. I think there's a question we didn't get to, but please don't hesitate to reach out to us at Robust Intelligence, contact@robustintelligence.com. We're happy to kind of continue the conversation and help compile some resources for attendees that might be interested. And thank you so much to the three panelists. Really appreciate your time. I want to note before we close off, we have another webinar on March 13th focused on AI security standards. So a little bit more of a narrow focused webinar with 3 panelists from MITRE, NIST, and OWASP. So please join us for that as well. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.